Hello, friends. Welcome to our class this Thursday evening, sponsored by Valley Beth Shalom, the VBS at Home learning series called Soul Mastery. I'm Rabbi Joshua Hoffman, and it is a pleasure to learn with you. We welcome all of our friends that are beginning to join us online in the coming minutes, and we welcome all new learners with us. So we'll be conducting a class for about an hour and engaging the great text from the Mussar tradition. And I'll introduce the entire subject in just a moment, but welcoming everybody into the classroom as they're making their way into our learning together. I'll be sharing text for us to study from on the screen. And when you see that projection on the screen, there will be an email address, which I invite you to reach out to me directly if you would like a copy of the text following this evening's learning together, and other opportunities for us to learn at Valley Beth Shalom and through the Facebook and YouTube universe is happening all the time from the Valley Beth Shalom community. So be sure to tune in to the vbs.org, VBS at Home page, where you'll find nightly learning, where you'll find all kinds of opportunities to connect together. I see a friend that is coming on the Zoom call. Hello, call-in user number 1. Welcome.
Hello.
Hi, who is this and what's your name?
My name is Esther Mueller.
Esther, so wonderful. So glad that you're learning with us.
Thank you.
All I have you in as a call-in user. So I'm glad that you're joining our learning, and welcome to the Zoom call. So you'll be with me on the Zoom call while most of our friends are going to be in the Facebook place. And
okay.
Esther, I'm going to have you muted once we go through the teaching, but if you would like to say anything, you know what, when I stop for questions, I'll stop and I'll unmute you. And if you have anything to contribute, you're welcome to contribute during the time, okay?
Okay.
Fantastic. It's a pleasure to learn with you and glad that you're with us tonight. I apologize, you're not going to be able to see the text. Is that correct?
That's right. I have no computer.
Oh, good. Well, we'll be reading it out loud, and we'll try to reflect on the text enough so that you could absorb it, as you're only going to be hearing it. And I just hope that you pick up as much as possible, and there'll be enough to keep you connected, okay?
It's fine.
Fantastic. Okay, so we're glad that we're all here, and welcome to this evening's learning. For those that are just joining us for the first time, we have been conducting this class now for, this is 5 sessions that we've been meeting. And we have covered some of the very foundational virtues, midot, as they're called in the Mussar tradition, virtues that we want to pay attention to and focus in order for us to expand our sense of self and really connect to what we've come to identify as our soul. And it's not that somehow the soul is some sort of quantifiable or measurable, tangible value. But really, the soul is this kind of extraordinary confluence of intellect and emotion and connection. And that's what we've been talking about through our classes. And we've talked about how to put ourselves in order. And we've talked about what it means to separate ourselves and the separate personalities, but also separate behaviors that enable us to do all the things that we need to do. As well as we talked about the virtue of menuchat hanefesh, or of equanimity, and how important it is to find a sense of calm and a sense of openness to receiving the world as it is before you're set about to change it into the world that it ought to be. And we talked about patience, savlanut, and we studied that concept in depth last week. And it's not just simply about waiting, as we talked about that in other instances of what we're very good at when it comes to what we think is patience. But it's not about waiting, but it's about an active kind of engagement in a world and a time when perhaps your place isn't the most immediate or necessary. And tonight we're going to take it a step further. And I really think that this is by far the most challenging midah. And it's also the most extensive virtue that we could be learning from in the Mussar tradition. And the text that I brought to you tonight are just really glimpses. It's an excerpt. Not only could this take a class, but this could take several months even to really understand and to try and balance out how one becomes a master of what we're calling nikiyut. And nikiyut comes from the Hebrew word naki, and it means in translation literally cleanliness. But tonight we're going to translate it for a much deeper and intense understanding, which is dignity. And when you understand cleanliness and dignity, you'll hear that it is not only something that you are attentive to with your own appearance, but it's also about recognizing the appearance of others, especially when sometimes their appearance, whether it's physical or it's some kind of like, emotional reactive experience, isn't necessarily clean. And how do you respond to that in a way that doesn't compromise your soul, compromise your integrity, and at the same time is enabling us to really connect on that higher level of what it means to be clean, what it means to have dignity, what it means to be pure. So tonight we're going to study some text, and I'm going to be bringing that up on the screen, and I will share those texts with all of us. And while my friend Esther is on screen and cannot, oops, wrong one. Hold on a second. Wait. No, that's right. Okay. And hold on. Thank you. There we go. Aha. Okay, fantastic. And I'm going to also enlarge the text because that also makes it nice for our learning. Okay, so hopefully you all can see this as I enlarge it. Very good. So again, this is Soul Mastery. The date is wrong. It's not April 30th. It's actually May 7th. Forgot to make that change. It's May 7th, so don't mind the dating, but do look at this concept, nikiyut, cleanliness or dignity. So what I want to begin with tonight is, I think, one of the fundamental concepts in Judaism, and it really emerges in the first chapters of the Torah, the book that we continually read in order to locate our origins. And the concept of locating our origins is something that is continuing to evoke speculation. We understand anthropologically that the development of the human being as a species and a creature transcends by far the 5,000 years that we understood the Bible to understand time. And even if we're really creative with our numbers and said 5,000 equals that time, we're still discovering more truths about what it means for the human being as a species to evolve. And throughout, so what it means for us to locate our origins means that this is where we begin to tell our story. And it's important for us to focus on that idea of beginning to tell our story, because when we read the text itself, it's not so much about whether or not we really understand kind of how the cosmos were formed and what happens, what do we do with dinosaurs and all the other sort of prevailing and incongruous opinions about how things have come to be. That's not the issue that is coming up. And pardon me, I'm just opening up my other page here so I can see you all participating online. And what it really means is that this is the story that we tell ourselves about how we came to be. That's what a myth is. A myth or mythology is not some kind of fantastic story that talks about heroic figures conquering the gods, but really a myth is a story of how we have come to be. And the beginning of our story is exactly what you're seeing on your screen right now. It is this idea that we are created in the image of God. B'Tselem Elohim, we call that. And that is such an important concept to continually refer to. And you'll hear it in so many places in the Jewish world as a reason, as a foundational understanding of why we do the things that we do, or why the legal structures are created in the way that they're created. Tonight, I want to go back and I want to look at the text even more. And I want to add, in addition to the sort of statement about what it means to be created in the image of God, I want to refer to that next statement. Okay, what happens next? So take a look at your text on the screen, and here's what it says. And God said, let us make the human in our image after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creepy things that creep on the earth. And God created the human in God's image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on the earth. So we've heard this before, and we understand this first text is kind of like a rationale, right? It's a kind of way for us to think about what the human being is and how the human being stands in relationship to God. We are created in the image of God. What I wanted to bring as an introduction to this concept of Nikiyut is the next step. It's actually kind of like expressed in two different ways in that verse, but in particular in that second verse after it says, let us create the human being in our image, male and female, he created them. And then it says, God blessed them and said, be fertile and increase and fill the sky, and you shall be a master over it. And what I wanted to take focus upon, I want to pay attention to, is what it means to subdue the earth, to master the earth. I think our implication is that somehow by our superior intellect or by our advanced biological ability, that we are somehow more clever, more intellectually capable, and even more physically capable of mastering the earth. Now, we know what it means to stand before a 700-pound gorilla and wonder if we're really as strong as any other creature that exists. That's certainly not what we're talking about here. But we're talking about this impulse, this idea that we are the most glorious creation. We are the finest creation of everything that has ever existed. And therefore, we are given permission to subdue and rule the earth as we see fit. What I think is also being said here is important to go back to the first idea. We are created in God's image. And that means that in order for us to fill the earth, to master it, and to be partners, stewards of the earth, we must be in the image of God in order to do that. It's not that our creation is something that is separate from the image of God, even with all of our foils and flaws and things that are imperfect. That might be a hard theological bite to chew on, but that's exactly what I think is coming out of this text, which is to say that if we are to be masters of the earth, stewards of the world, and to rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, that we do so in the image of God. That I understand to be what Nikiyut means, to be clean, to be pure. It means that our partnership is in alignment with the sense of God that we understand to be this force that created all of nature and all that exists. And our appreciation of that creation is born out of our partnership. And the celebration of that partnership is when we are living to our best ability to be in the image of God. So let me stop right there. I'm going to see if I can see anybody's comments on our Facebook about that. And if you have any comments, feel free to share. And I'm going to go to you. Esther, how you doing? You're okay?
Yes, I'm fine. Thank you.
So far, so good. Wonderful. Okay. Let's see if we have any comments. Thank you for your patience. There we go. Okay, great. So seeing no comments at this moment, we're going to move right on. And we're glad that you're here. Okay, so Let me share the screen again, and now we'll go back into our text and begin to study. Oops. Let's try this again. All right, here we go. Are you with me? Fantastic. Now we're going to be studying from Mesilat Yesharim, which is The Path of the Just by Moshe Chaim Luzzatto from the 18th century. And here's what he says about this midah, this quality of cleanliness. And I'll read it for us. The particulars of the trait of cleanliness are very numerous. They are as all the particulars of all the 365 negative commandments. In other words, cleanliness, at least on its surface, is all about preventing all those things that we're not supposed to do. And if you do that, then ostensibly you would be clean. For I already mentioned that the matter of cleanliness is to be clean of all branches of the various sins. Even though the Yetzer Hara, evil inclination, strives to cause one to sin on every sin, nevertheless, there are certain ones which a person's nature desires more. We'll study that a little bit further. There are things that draw our attention away from our potential to be B'Tselem Elohim, to be in the divine image, that are more compelling or more attractive. And I think the answer to that is relative. I don't think that there's some kind of standard of virtues and only those who attain the certain level are the ones that are masters of it. Anyone who's ever been with a friend on a journey through addiction understands this well. It's not about the act itself. While that might be the precipitating factor that caused the addiction, it's really the sort of underlying impulse that causes someone to continue to sin even against their best intentions. In those, the evil inclination presents to him more rationalizations why it is permitted. Therefore, one needs to especially strengthen himself in these to a greater extent in order to vanquish his evil inclination and cleanse himself from sin. This, our sages said, theft and forbidden relations are sins which a person's soul desires and lusts for. Okay? In other words, what he's saying is one needs to know the very sins, if you will, the very acts of what we call the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, even with the very specifics that come from our Torah, which say that they're prohibited acts, and not only bolster ourselves against them, but also to be concerned about the desire that they even precipitate. Okay? So here's an example. An example of one of these is cleanliness from theft. And I love what he writes here. So let's read. We can observe that even though most people are not blatant thieves, literally taking with their hands the possession of their fellow and putting it in their own possessions, nevertheless, most people experience a taste of theft in their business dealings by rationalizing permission to profit through their fellow's loss. They may tell themselves, business is different. I thought that this first text was really powerful because I think theft is something that we would say, we'd never do that. I mean, it says in the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not steal. But wait a minute. I mean, is it possible that maybe if we don't literally take the possession of somebody else, that there's something that we might take of a person from our own advantage, right? And if we were to say even more so, our personal lives, how we relate with the people in our home is one thing, but when you're out in the business world, it means anything is game because it's all about survival. And I wanted to kind of recognize this based on that last teaching. There's something about this idea of stewardship and this conflict that we have with our desire to succeed. There's somehow this sense that the more that we rule over, the more successful we are considered, the more powerful we become, and therefore the more loved we are as a result. Because after all, the Torah says, you are created in the image of God and master the earth. The flaw in stewardship thinking is that you, as an individual, have the best possible solution of how to make this world work the most. And if along the way, in your business dealings or even in your interpersonal connections, your persuasive nature or your compelling nature changes someone in order to change their behavior to your advantage, you might not always be, but you might be engaged in theft. So let me stop with that for a second before we go on to the next thing. The idea that we're not thieves, but we have thoughts that sometimes take away from others. And what this text is trying to say to us is not that you're a thief, but that you have to be careful, because even your thoughts, even if they thought that they were of the best intention, they might be motivated by something that elevates yourself and doesn't elevate your soul, that elevates your personal and material satisfaction, but doesn't necessarily elevate your soul satisfaction. And those moments are things that need to be carefully examined. So let me stop for a second. I'm going to take a look and see if any of our friends have comments about that. Esther, how you doing? You have anything to add so far? Or are you feeling pretty good?
No, I'm okay. Thank you.
Awesome. Very good. Glad that you are still learning with us. And hopefully, is the pace okay with you since you're on the phone?
Yes, it's fine.
Magnificent. Okay. So, oops. Hold on a second. Okay. All right, good. Me and technology this week. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Anybody who's been hanging out with me can really say, wow, things aren't working the way that they usually work this week. Rabbi Hoffman, are you okay? I am okay, but my technology is something else. All right, so far so good. And now we've got this idea that we're kind of like wrestling with, okay? And we're gonna do another element that Luzzatto brings to us, which is this idea that, there we go. Not only cleanliness and theft, but now we're going to take it one level deeper. And by the way, his whole chapter on cleanliness, which is really extensive, goes into much, much more. Oh, oops, this is a really great thing from another part. Just to kind of give you some further understanding, right? Negative commandments like you shall not steal, you shall not rob, you shall not oppress, nor lie to one another, you shall not oppress one another, you shall not push back your neighbor's boundary. All of these are divisions of the laws of theft which apply to many common business transactions, and each one includes many prohibitions under it. In other words, what we're saying is we're going back into this is that you might be an honest business person, but the desire to kind of even think about these things when you're in an attempt to sort of like, preserve your own material well-being. If you engage in that, doesn't mean put yourself at sacrifice. It means that if you act upon those desires, that act is an act that is considered unclean. Okay? And unclean is not like icky unclean. Here it's like lo naki, not clean, or it is indignified, undignified. That's the thing that we're working on. So here's another example. This one is a very common one. It happens all the time in our lives. And I got to tell you, I am one of the things that is the silver lining of this moment is that because we're spending so much more time in the virtual space, and even when we're talking on the telephone and we're kind of like interacting with people in the world, there's a greater permission, more in general, there is a greater permission and understanding of people and their shortcomings and their behavior. And I think that that is just such a great opportunity for us. In this moment when people are giving the other benefit of the doubt, maybe it's not just enough to like kind of feel like you're giving people a little bit more patience and understanding. but it's actually a really opportunity to say, what happens if after I give that person patience and understanding, what kind of connection can we make? Where do our souls connect? That's what makes this work so beautiful, timely, salient, and I hope powerful for us learning tonight. So words that hurt. Here, included in the sin of oppression of speech, which is a big concept in the Talmud called ona'at devarim, is to say that someone in private, something explicit which may cause him shame, right? In other words, this is the like, if you were, telling your friend, gee, could you believe the clothes that he was wearing at that last dinner that we were with? If you said that in his presence, wouldn't that cause him to feel a sense of shame? That's ona'at devarim. That's saying you shouldn't engage in that kind of contact. And you shouldn't engage in that kind of like conversation with people. And that's hard. It's human for us to do that. And the limit of our recognition when perhaps we're behaving that way is something that we need to work on here. So it continues on, he says, all the more so, to say something explicit which causes him shame, or to do him an act which causes him shame, right? So it's about saying something in private, but it's what about like when you're kind of out there and you're giving somebody that sort of like look down, right? You see somebody wearing clothes that don't match very well, or maybe their hair is a little unkempt, or maybe there's some kind of like, expression that they express, a gesture, a joke that was off color and really landed poorly. And you have a reaction to that, which may actually cause that person shame. Okay? This is what our sages said. Give another example. If a person was a Baal Tshuva, in other words, if a person was somebody who like made a mistake and corrected themselves, you can't say to that person, remember what you did once then. If they really did do tshuva, as we call, you have to move on in your life, right? It's good for you and it's good for them. If sickness befalls him, do not say to him in the way the friends of Job said, remember, please, whoever perished being innocent. In other words, like, did you deserve this? Is that really what's happening here? Oh boy, in our world today, God forbid, I think we all recognize that that we kind of blame people for catching this infection, spreading this virus. And we know that's kind of really, really underneath the surface here. And we also see that that's largely not the public discourse that we're exposed to in our days. So he continues, if traveling merchants ask you for grain, do not tell them, go to such and such who sells grain. And you know that that person never sold grain in his life. That comes from the Talmud. And they're all three examples that just tell you what it means for your words to be deceptive and to be judgmental, to cause other people shame. That is indignified. That is lo naki. And that practice is something that we need to focus on as we're continuing our learning, but it's what you want to become a master of when you want to be a soul with a life that is filled with meaning, a life that matters. So our sages of blessed memory already said, verbal oppression is more severe than monetary oppression. This is even more so if the shaming is done in public, as we learned explicitly. One who whitens his neighbor's face or shames him publicly has no portion in the world to come. And Rabbi Chisda taught in Bava Metzia, all the gates of prayer are locked, except the gates for the cries of verbal oppression. That's a reflection on the tragedy of the temple being destroyed. And even in that moment of great destruction, when human beings' ability to access God, to be not only B'Tselem Elohim, but B'Shutafut Elohim, in partnership with Elohim, that all those gates were closed at that time, except for those that felt the shame or were victimized by verbal oppression. The idea of Lashon Hara, that's also what it's called, hurting words, has that kind of irreparable damage is something that I think we can easily identify of what it means for us to be naki and dignified. It's important that what we do is not only a reflection of how we look, but it's also a reflection of how we look to others. And we're going to talk a little bit about the complicating nature of that and what that means all about. So let me stop again. Any comments? Anybody who wants to be a thought, please go ahead and mark it in the chat. I love it. Yes, we want to be good people, and we're working on that. It takes effort. I'm going to read Lex. Thanks, Lex. Learning our behaviors. Learning. It's not just about knowing what the right thing to do is. I just really appreciate it, that we're not just here to consume or digest a list of behaviors. This is about practice and active living of these values. Because we know that, times when we're going to be judgmental of other people is natural. It's part of our humanity. And the idea of transforming those moments, of lifting ourselves, because our best self, our best sense of selves are when we encounter other people devoid of any of that judgmentalism, devoid of anything that separates us between them. That kind of living is what makes life so beautiful. It's what makes life filled with love in our world. And I think that's more work that we need to focus on, especially in a time like this. Okay. Esther, you okay?
Yes.
Love you. Okay, let's go back. And now we're going to study the Cheshbon HaNefesh. And the Cheshbon HaNefesh, or Menachem Mendel Levin of Satanov, is teaching us this text about Nikiyut. He says, let not stain or ugliness be found in your possessions or in your home, and surely not on your body or clothes. So Menachem Mendel Levin, in trying to understand what cleanliness means, is really kind of like picking up on that, again, like 18th century thinking that was really popularized by Benjamin Franklin. It was very much popular in Europe, and it really does form a little bit of the ideological basis of the modern Mussar movement, the 13 principles of virtued life, and the idea of cleanliness is next to godliness, right? We've heard that before. The Talmud has it in a similar way. The Talmud says cleanliness leads to purity. In other words, there are these maxims, these precepts that we have, which say that cleanliness is a portal. It's an entryway through which we can attain higher levels of connection. So here he says, let not stain or ugliness be found in your possessions. In other words, to be clean is to be, in a way, not only on your body and your clothes, but like stainless, blameless in your behavior. And if you are a very, very assiduous chassid, a very assiduous student, a very assiduous Mussar student, you even find that that stain that potentially exists inside your soul has been cleaned up as well. So let's read a little bit about what Menachem Mendel Levin means. And this is from Rabbi Aristone and others in his Mussar and Mussar Pathways book. What are the stains or ugliness? Well, certainly they can be physical stains. The Gemara says in Shabbat that a Torah scholar who walks around with a stain on his or her coat is deserving of the death sentence at the hand of God. Chayav mitah. That's extreme language, I would say. But the purpose of the statement is to highlight the importance of conveying the benefits of living with Torah and not showing a lack of concern for the world. By showing up with an unclean appearance, we show a lack of respect for others, ourselves, for others, and for the Torah itself. Okay, let me pause right there for a minute, because I think that that kind of scratches on a very practical, real surface of our lives. And I'll just give a personal example. A couple years ago, I was in Israel with a group of families, very excited to celebrate their B'nai Mitzvah. And is the custom to kind of dress in white. and to be kind of fresh and light, even though the scorching sun was beating down upon our heads and shoulders, even at 10 a.m. in the morning. And we're getting ready to go. And lo and behold, I'm holding my coffee cup. I'm the happiest rabbi with a great cup of coffee from Israel. And I spilled the cup of coffee on my white shirt. Of course, if anybody's been in Jerusalem, it's not like you can just run back to the car and change your shirt, even if you had a change of shirt. So I didn't have any of them, but I did have a talit. And I wanted to make sure that, God forbid, anybody who was participating in this really holy moment of celebrating a bar mitzvah of their child, that they wouldn't be distracted by the stain that was on my shirt. And what I noticed in the moment is, first of all, I spent a whole lot of time keeping my talit over my shirt. And thankfully, nobody was asking if everything was okay, because I was able to kind of like cover it up. But what's bringing to mind here was that my mind was so focused on the stain that was on my shirt that it prevented me from being fully present for the families. And I think we know this. I mean, I've seen it. It was probably true for my dinner tonight. We spill stuff all over the place. We're walking into places we didn't even realize that we had stains or spills on our shirts. And somebody says, "Oh, by the way, did you notice that?" And they don't mean to shame you when it happens, but it happens. So there's a part of this when he says, don't let a stain or ugliness possess you, is exactly that, right? And don't let it be something that is a hindrance, because that kind of hindrance prevents you from being the soul that you really want to be. So, there are so many analogies today about this. I mean, really, there was even some newfangled crazy idea that if you swallowed some bleach, that you would not only get rid of this virus, but you would be clean on the inside and on the outside. We have to be very careful about what it really means to be clean and to what lengths that we'll go to it. And the last thing I'll say in a comment before we go back into our study is I want to just draw your attention to a book. It's actually a series of books of a wonderful rabbi, great teacher. He happens to be a member of our community. His name is Mark Gelman. And he wrote a great book for children mostly like in the 3rd grade. And the name of the book is called Always Wear Clean Underwear. And I think that is kind of like one of those worldly wisdom pieces of insight and great Torah text, even though it didn't come from the Torah, that teaches us it's not really about what people see, but it's about how you perceive what you see and whether that enables you to be present with people in the way that you ideally hope and mean to. Let's go back to our text. Let's see if we can study the next thing about cleanliness. Okay? All right. So now we're going to this. I hope you can see it well. It is important for us to create a positive impression of ourselves as a way to enhance our connection with others. The main concern around our appearance is to find a way to be focused and not over-focused on our appearance with the goal of being welcoming to another. In the same vein, it is important for us to not be put off by the appearance of others and to move beyond their physical attributes to gain an essence into their true nature. So in this introduction, Rabbi Aristotle making a comment on the Cheshbon HaNefesh, on Menachem Mendel Lefin's teaching, is that it's important for us to create a positive impression, right? We need to look clean. There's something important about us being properly attired so that we're not concerned about the way that we look. And it's not only about us as we sort of continue to read, but it's about the effect that we have on others. And that's why, men, women, people of all varieties of identity spend a lot of time making themselves look really good. And looking good is important, right? Looking good definitely shows you that what you do cares. Okay, so let's continue. As always, it is a balance. In a Cheshbon HaNefesh, Rabbi Mendel of Sadnov writes, don't say, I am preoccupied with heavenly matters. How can I waste my time with bodily matters just for the sake of appearances? In addition to being concerned with the heavenly matters, it is essential attention that we focus on the important concerns of the world of personal health and wellness as reflected by our appearance. In other words, we might say that the righteous path is one that says, forget about the way that you look. Just focus on being with God. The more that you are with God, the more holy you are. And if you are so concerned about being holy, then you don't need to spend time on the way that you look. Of course, there are varying gradations of how one ought to look. And I think that when we get through the text, we'll come to a better understanding about being present for the other in the way that they appear. And if they appear as if they are presenting themselves in a very positive way, even if that might not appear to us that way, we can celebrate and recognize, we can honor them with dignity, that is the way that they appear to us. And similarly, we can also have that feeling of ourselves, right? It's not just a matter of dressing up the finest. I am so grateful that we are living in a time when I don't have to wear ties. Believe me, if our culture transforms that we don't need to wear ties anymore, I will celebrate and rejoice. And I have some beautiful ties in my closet. I'm just ready to not wear them. Nevertheless, this idea that if our appearance isn't something that we can be proud of when we are present with others, then it's not godly. It's not holy. Okay, last comment. Let's keep on a little bit more. And anybody else who would like to make a comment, go ahead and comment in the screen as we're reading. And then I'll stop and take a break and I'll read those comments or questions, whatever you like, in just a moment. The midah of nikiyut might better be understood as dignity. It would be misleading not to focus here on how seriously and profoundly our tradition takes the idea of nikiyut, or dignity, with regard to the exterior life. We know this because, in fact, we are drawn near to or repelled by people depending on their appearance. A dirty and disheveled appearance might repel us, despite the fact that the person from whom we are repelled might be a great sage or other worthy individual. If we are repelled by such person, how much more sensitive must we be not to repel others who might come into contact with us? If we take this a step further, we will recognize that it is precisely our concern to bear the burden of the other, which compels us to take nikiyut seriously by, on the one hand, not being repelled by those who are dirty or disheveled, recognizing our obligation to respond to them as the people they are under the dirt and dishevelment, and on the other hand, assuming the responsibility ourselves not to cause others to be repelled from us. Now, I was explaining a little bit of that before I read the paragraph. So you get this idea that appearance is not something that is not only on the way that we present ourselves, but it's also the recognition of how others are presented and our need to kind of like adjust and correct our behavior. It's not a judgment that we have to subdue, but it's a matter of us actually being able to transform our reaction into something that is loving. That's transforming our impulse into something that is called the Yetzer HaTov, transforming our impulse into something that is called tikkun, correction. It means that our connection is one that is a pure one. It is a clean one. So let me stop right there. Lex writes, if God created us in God's image, then does this mean when we are in the presence of others, are we too in the presence of God, as they too are created in God's image? So I just want you to know, when it was read, and with your respect, Lex, I tried to degender the his, because I think the subtle understanding of that is that somehow there's some bifurcation of gender, and we shouldn't be focused on that. But this idea, and it's a really beautiful comment, and thank you for saying it, right? If we are created in the image of God, then when we encounter others, it is our ability, it's our responsibility. We are burdened to see the image of God in the other. And the more that we can see the image of God in the other, not only an individual that's standing before us, but also a community of people, but even the world, if there is such a tangible, real possibility of seeing the image of God in every facet of existence. If you can do that, you understand what it really means to be in that first text, right? To fill the world with your presence and to become a master of it. To master the world doesn't mean to crush it and subdue it to your own will, but it means to be the master that brings all of God's presence together. Okay? No apologies, you're good. All right. So, last thing from Rabbi Aristone, and then we'll continue on. Let's see how we're doing on time. All right, looks like we're going to be on time. The idea of preening, or adopting an obsessive or ostentatious concern with our appearance, does not suggest to us the values that we associate with either the scholar or the sage. This precisely points out the importance and difficulty of nikiyut. Each midah negotiates between olam hazeh, this world, and olam haba, the world to come. Each of these virtues that we're studying is a negotiation between those two realities. And we've studied that before in some of our classes. Olam haba is that next moment, the future that is being written as we're experiencing it. And it's the one that we have an ability to shape and create with our present, our olam hazeh behavior. In the case of nikiyut, the importance is clear. It is the pain encountered in the contraction of the self to create the soul in which the other is actually made to feel welcome in the embrace of the Yetzer HaTov. That's a beautifully worded statement. It's a big statement. Let's break it down, because we see pain and we think that that means suffering. But this idea that the soul exists because it requires transformation in order for it to thrive. And in that process of transformation, we might feel unsettled or uncomfortable because it's not our impulse, it's not our nature. But we know that when we cultivate the practice of Yetzer HaTov, or positive soul being, we not only lift ourselves up, but we also make the other feel welcome in our embrace, right? Just think about that, and I'll give another example. The example is another really important example, then I'll go back to the text. This is something that we experience as a congregational rabbi frequently, and I say we because I'm certain that all my colleagues experience this in some way or another. The experience is that every once in a while we have people that are very much in need, whether it's a physical need or it's a mental health need or even a spiritual need. And they come to us for guidance and support. And there was one occasion in which a woman, and not the only occasion, but the one that's coming to mind, in which a woman came to the steps of the synagogue, and it happened to have been during a Shabbat, and she was looking for a little bit of food. And of course, we have food, and we as a community have taken on the responsibility of bringing food to those who are most in need. As she came forward, because she was so unkept, she was so physically diminished. Not only was she thin and even emaciated, but she had such a smell about her because she had not showered for so long, that my first impression, it was almost noxious, and I was taken aback. And I would just, my first impression was that there was a little bit of the element of like trying to be in that space to kind of force people to react to you, because if you are a person who feels invisible to the rest of the world, then you do anything in order for people to pay attention to you. And after that first reaction, I just remember having to see her humanity, to see her soul, to see the image of God, B'Tselem Elohim, inside of her. And then it was easy. She's hungry, she's in need, she needs someone to be kind to her. And then all that great virtue was able to be expressed. The reality here is that people sometimes, either intentionally or unintentionally, really kind of like set us off, and they repel us, or we feel repelled, even if they weren't intending to do so. And it's our responsibility to be kind of like the souls and personalities that embrace people wherever we find them. So let's go back to the text, finish Rabbi Menachem Mendel, and if there's anything. Esther, you okay? Esther?
Yes, I'm here.
Wonderful. Okay. So let me get this. Whoop, sorry. Get that. Got it. Okay. So now, dignity is the quality or state of being worthy, honored, or esteemed, and is accompanied by a formal reserve or seriousness of manner, appearance, or language appropriate to the cultivation of a place for the divine within us. At its heart, Nikiyut requires that we recognize the highest action of our consciousness and the process of creating our souls, not ourselves, as a reflection of the pursuit of the divine manifested in our lives. When we confuse the dignity of ourselves with the dignity of the process of creating a soul, we pervert Nikiyut from cleanliness to ostentation. Whew. How do you tell the difference between getting all gussied up to go to Rosh Hashanah services is for you being clean in the presence of God and community, and it's not just to show off to your neighbors who are sitting in the pews around you, that they see that you have a nice new article of clothing or your hair is done just right. When you confuse the dignity of ourselves with the process of creating a soul, okay? Meaning that like it's just about us feeling good versus we really do this because we want to share our souls with the world and we want to be in the best possible way to appear for others to embrace us. That is when cleanliness oscillates to ostentation. When we differentiate between the two, not only do we master Nikiyut, but we begin to create the element of kavod, honor, that will serve us later in our spiritual development. Any comments, any contributions at this point? Anybody would like to say before we continue on to the practical application of this and our learning? I hope you get the understanding of what Nikiyut is about, and that it's not only just about looking clean and staying clean physically, but it's also about like the dignity and being clean of whatever kind of impulsive reactions that might separate you from another. Okay. So Lex asks, is this referring to vanity? So yes, it is, right? The idea of when do you move from having a clean appearance and entering into vanity? It's when, at least according to Rabbi Stone and others, it's that moment when the idea, the purpose of your clean behavior is to make yourself feel good and to get others to see you as looking good, versus making yourself look good so that when you encounter others, they don't have to look at your appearance because they're looking into your soul. That is kind of the work that I think we're talking about here. Any other comments? Okay, so here's what we'd like to do is take a moment, and now we're going to do a little bit of practical application. This is a what would you do? Now, in our learning, what we've done before is we take a few moments, and first we kind of like prepare ourselves, because you're going to read a scenario, and I want you to be able to not only put yourself in the mind of the person who's experiencing the situation, but I want you to put yourself in the mind of how would you respond to that person? In other words, I want you to be able to insert yourself in that moment, not only based on the text that we were learning, but also like your reality, yourself, and where yourself and perhaps this idea or concept of maybe transforming yourself to higher levels of virtue might come into play. So to do that, I invite you to sit up straight wherever you're sitting. Take some nice deep breaths in. Exhale through your mouth, in through your nose. One more time, in through your mouth, out through your nose. And begin to focus in on this scenario. A small, thin woman, Betty, sits next to a very large woman, Anne, at a spirituality conference. Sitting next to Anne, Betty is aware of and put off by her sloppy attire and her intense smell. Over the next several hours, Betty finds herself sharing some intimate conversations with Anne, but continues to be very judgmental. She does not understand what Anne is doing at a conference on spirituality if she does not take care of herself. Eventually, Betty changes her seat. Okay, so obviously these are not like, captions and snapshots of people at their best. So, but there's a reality to this. And if you're paying attention and you've experienced this, then you can relate. So what would you do, right? So first of all, if you were Anne or you were Betty, okay, and you had studied this text, what would you do? How would you apply this concept of nikiyut? How would you apply these concepts of transforming your reactions into soul connection? What would you do? Go ahead and write it into the chat box and just contemplate it for a moment as we continue on. Happy to take any comments. Esther, you're unmuted if you'd like to say anything, and anybody else who is in the chat. So the first question is, what would you do if you were Anne? Right? You're listening to this and you're recognizing that you're sensitive. You're recognizing that somebody's kind of uncomfortable with you. So how do you react? Well, maybe you go back to this, sense of saying there might be something unseemly with myself that is causing a reaction in the other. Or there's this other part, right? Which is I am completely oblivious. I have no idea. And your reaction is kind of revealing something to me. And I don't want to feel ashamed about this, but either if there's something that I could change as far as like, my odor, I'll change it. Right? But if there's something about my like interaction that is causing you or preventing you from being connected to me, what can we do to change that together? I would say the same thing for Betty. Really courageous work, right? Betty is having a hard time. She doesn't want to hurt Anne's feelings. Who wants to hurt anybody's feelings? They're at a spirituality conference of all places, right? They don't want to cause anybody harm. They're there to like better their souls. But there she is in the spirituality conference feeling the very real experiences of this person that's there is really not somebody that I get along with. So she gets up and leaves. And on the one hand, that's probably a good solution, right? If she can't change the way that she's thinking, well, then go to where she shouldn't be connected. But then, what if she studied this Mussar text and she was a practitioner of nikiyut? Maybe she would be able to say, I am noticing my reaction to this other is something that is very narrow upon only a certain aspect of this person's identity. And I've even had the privilege of having some conversations with them. And they're very precious conversations. So I'm going to be able to use this concept of nikiyut to transform my thinking. And I'm going to say that I need to recognize that the uncleanliness, the indignity that is rising up within me is preventing me from seeing Anne, this other person, as she fully could be. And if you were the facilitator in the group or you saw this happening, what would you do? And no, the answer can't be clobber them over the head and tell them to be better people, although that would feel like a really good solution to the problem. But how can you also radiate a sense that you see the dignity of those people without kind of like even subtly raising some kind of like awareness that the way that one is treating the other, behaving towards the other is a little less dignified? Is there something positive that you can say? Something to kind of like elevate their thinking, maybe with a piece of text or a piece of wisdom. That kind of behavior, really comes with practice. So let's do the second scenario, just double checking our time. And I tell you what, we are going to skip the second scenario. I have a great respect for your time. If anybody wants to text, you will please email me and I will send you the text and you can explore this second scenario. But I want to conclude with one of the things that you can practice to take from tonight and to continue on. And it's something that we recite every Shabbat when we gather in communities for prayer, even if we're praying on our own. In the middle of the Shabbat prayers, the Amidah prayer, we are given from the tradition one particular blessing that we say on Shabbat. And I'm going to read it for you, and you're going to notice the bold part, and that's where we'll conclude. Our God and God of our ancestors, be pleased with our rest. Sanctify us with your commandments, and give us your share in your Torah. Satisfy us from your goodness, and gladden us with your deliverance. And purify our hearts to serve you in truth. And give us as our inheritance, Adonai our God, in love your holy Shabbat. And may all Israel rest thereon, the sanctifiers of your name. Blessed are you, I, sanctifier of Shabbos. Forgot to change that to Shabbat. Shabbos. So, is something to practice. And Shabbat is a time in which we don't ask to do the purification of our hearts. We ask for God to help us in that work. And Shabbat is a time in which we can step back and marvel at our creation and all the hard work that we have undertaken through the week and the practice that we have undertaken in order for us to really better ourselves and our souls. And it really is, if this concept is true, that we are created B'Tselem Elohim, and that means that we are partners with God to be stewards of all that exists and to master it, not to subdue it, not to crush it, but to be able to sanctify it, to share in the glory of creation. To do so is to truly be an embodiment of the dignity that us, as God gave to us God's image, we embody for others. And those are other individuals, and those are our communities, and those are the people that we're meeting through the Zoomverse, and those are even the wonderful expressions of nature and other creatures and of the vegetation and life that grows out there. Those kinds of encounters, purifying our hearts to serve us in truth. So what it means to really be B'Tselem Elohim, to really be partners with God in shutafut. And as we conclude tonight, I hope that you practice a little bit of Nikiyut. Anybody who would like to study this, we're in a small group. I'm inviting you and I welcome you to join me. We're going to be starting a small group probably in a couple weeks on Tuesday evenings at around 8 p.m. So it'll be a later class. You'll see how this text gets a little bit more interactive in small groups, and we'll take it to another level with some other dimensions of learning, including some meditative aspects which make the Mussar practice so applicable and amenable to transformation. So please email me if you're interested in starting that class. We're going to be starting it in just a couple weeks, not this next Tuesday, probably the following Tuesday. But for us learning and soul mastery, thank you so much for joining tonight. So glad that you were here. I got so caught up, I forgot to share. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. So glad you're here learning with us. Please join us for all the great learning programs that happen at Valley Beth Shalom. And next Thursday, we'll have another installment of Soul Mastery as we continue to learn these incredible virtues and qualities which help us lift our souls up and be the very best that we can be in the world. Have a great night. Thanks for joining me.